So, Nivedita, last time I was talking about my visit to Australia, and I mentioned to you the Maldives operation. And I was going to describe that to you because the Australian the defense chief of defense staff, was very impressed with our operations in Maldives within a matter of hours, which no country in the world expected India was capable of doing. But I'm not going to describe the Maldives because I've already covered that. I've remembered that I've already covered that Maldives operation in great detail to you earlier in the series. So all I wish to say is that this one action which India took in the Maldives across the seas to save the democracy of that island showed not only tremendous political foresight and will by the then government, that is Rajiv Gandhi's government, but also the very quick reaction that the defense forces of India could do, that's Army, Navy, and Air Force, which was quite a surprise to the other nations of the world, especially the Americans, the Australians, Western world, even China. Because at the end of the day, nobody expected that India had the guts to do something like this, or India had the capability of doing something. So I don't remember if you recollect the Time magazine that came shortly after that, we were on the front page with the Indian aircraft in the sky and ships on the sea and tanks on the ground to saying that India has joined the great power. That's only talk. The fact is it requires a lot of detailed planning and political will before anyone can do something like this. And that also successfully. So coming back to my visit to Australia, I also visited Sydney and Brisbane because I wanted to visit this so-called quick reaction division that the Australians have got ready for action within hours, which is never used. I explained to you last time that there was the Fiji island where a democratic government was overthrown by the local military commander, but neither the Australian government nor their army were interested in intervening because it was an Indian fellow who became the prime minister. It's interesting to see how everybody wants to downgrade India. Even today, if you read the news, everywhere in the world, especially from the Western world and all that, there are caustic comments about India, whatever. This is not to be bothered with because we'll go our way, the way we are wanting to go. Nobody can stop us. Our time has come, as one might say. And hopefully, with the present government and the way it's functioning for uplifting of the poor of India and also increasing the economic and military strength of India, that we will certainly become a power to be considered in the world, rather than everything being decided by the United States of America, opposed only by the Chinese. So anyway, I visited Brisbane, and it was an interesting visit. I found them very efficient in their military training, and also the fact that they could get off the ground very fast. They had aeroplanes and things like that. But if there's no military or political will to use them, they will never be used. As simple as that. Meanwhile, we in India, since we had no system by which we could do a quick reaction for, when I had described the Maldives operation to you, I had said that it took us 5 or 6 hours to strap the artillery guns, it's a 75 pack howitzer as it is known as, to be broken into mule packs, which the parachute battalion uses in war. And since the brigade commander wanted to carry that, it took us 5 or 6 hours to lash them onto platforms to load them in the air. Because there's a very complicated method of tying these onto platforms, which has got 6 or 7 parachutes, and then they can be dropped over the enemy territory if necessary by air. Of course, we made certain rules and regulations after the experience of this operation, both in regard to the cooperation between the Army, Navy, and Air Force, and also to get quick reaction forces like the parachute brigade, ready to move, not in 3 days' notice, but in hours, 2 hours notice. That means they've got certain portions of the units on guard duty, more or less, ready to move at a short notice. And guns and things are already mounted on platforms so that they can be loaded pronto into the aircraft. So we have managed to get what one would term as a quick reaction force for any operations outside the boundaries of India, or for that matter, within the boundaries of India, if the need arises. So in Brisbane, nothing more to say. It's a town on the eastern coast of Australia, north of Sydney, and it is a very nice climate. There's a Great Barrier Reef nearby. They took us, Snoopy and me, on a helicopter to show us the Great Barrier Reef, which we could only see from the air because the weather was not so good for us to go by boat. Why it's such an important thing, this Great Barrier Reef, is because it's got the underwater growth, which not only protects the Australian shores, but also runs the ecology of the various undersea life of fish and frogs and plants and so on and so forth. And these are all dying, by the way, because of the saline increase inside the oceans, which is part of global warming, I think. But really, all of us have to do a lot of work to try and save the ecology. Otherwise, a large number of fish species and undersea creatures are dying off because of the slow death of the coral reefs of the Great Barrier Reef and similar under ocean things in the Andaman Nicobar Islands and other places. We got back from, and this is late 1988 when I had taken over the chief. And now came the year of 1989. I told you last time that 1989 was a very interesting year, full of problems, full of actions required by us to try and meet the problems. I had already described to you certain problems that arose in Punjab and which we in the military decided to help with. We helped the police, and we did manage to make the first breakthrough to the very strict, very, very nasty terrorism from Sikh youth who were, there are a small percentage of them who don't have jobs, so they cross the border, go to Pakistan, get a lot of money, get a lot of weapons training with plenty of drugs, and they come back and create mayhem inside Punjab, which happens to be a border state. It keeps happening. It was happening when I was a Major General in 1982 in the Military Operations Directorate. I described that to you earlier. And it happened very nastily when I was the chief in 1988-89. And it's still happening, as you can see in the newspaper. So these are problems. Everybody thinks that once you get independence in a country, that all is smooth sailing after that. It is not so. The idea of independence is a single aim. You managed to get it from the British in 1947. Subsequently, to run a country, to establish a rule of law, to bring up the poverty-stricken people, and to enhance the economy and the defense of the land creates series of problems, not only from outside, but more so from inside the country, because there's so many other people in this country who have a different view of things and don't necessarily agree with a single government at the center. So these problems will continue. Not to worry about it, as I've said to many people, life would be so boring if there were no problem. You have got problems facing you in your personal life, in the life with your children, with their marriages, with your grandchildren, with your spouse, and you have to overcome these problems. That's what makes life interesting. So that so is also with the nation. You are going to have problems. Every government faces problems, and some of them handle these problems very effectively. Others don't handle them effectively. And so life carries on. Anyway, 1989, first I must tell you that I had a foreign visit coming up. I had decided to go to Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was one country at that time. And now it is two countries. You know, it's the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic. They separated. So at the time I visited, I could see signs of the separation coming up. Why should a country like Czechoslovakia, which is north of Austria, as you know, and extends eastwards towards Ukraine and Romania and Hungary and all that, why should they break up? Basically, they are ethnic divides because eastern Czechoslovakia had a Slav type of people, which are Russian speaking and, you know, similar ethnic people as the Russians and the Soviets, and as Serbia and erstwhile Yugoslavia. Whereas in the western part of Czechoslovakia, these are Teutonic races, more of the German extraction, who look different and think differently. It does show an indication that if we have a series of ethnic differences, then yes, give me a minute. Yeah, if there are ethnic differences, one of the few examples in the world I'd like to point out to you is India itself. We have very large ethnic differences between South, North, East, and West India. Yet somehow we have managed to be one country for many centuries. Even in erstwhile days, there was a desire, even by the earlier kings after the Mahabharata, if you like, where there was an endeavor to get everybody together in this country. And so I do feel there is something more to the togetherness of this country than merely the fact of geography and the different ethnic groups inside this country. But we are an example to the world of how severely different ethnic people, whether you think of Assam or Punjab or Tamil Nadu or Kerala or UP, for instance, how they manage to survive together. It's a good example to the world. Europe is another example. I mean, they got together in the European Union. There are 26 nations there. But each of those nations are smaller than any of our Indian states, you see, not only in size, but also in population. So they've got a much smaller population. The whole of European Union doesn't have more than about 350 million people, which is not even a quarter of what we have in this country. So we are an example. Another example is China. We have to compliment them because it's such a large nation with over a billion citizens. There are fair differences between North China, South China, East China, and West China of people and their dialects that they speak. Nevertheless, they are under one rule, which we must appreciate. It's not easy to run a government of this nature. So when I went to Czechoslovakia, I was received by the army chief, who was my host. He was a person called, he was a General Miroslav Vacek. And Miroslav Vacek was a very handsome man, 6 feet tall, with a very beautiful wife, who was also about 5 feet 11 inches tall. And Shrupi and I were pygmies in front of them, but we made good friends, you see. And he did his briefing, etc. I was there for 3 days, 3 or 4 days. And he had planned that we should, after briefing in the capital, to go to a western area of Czechoslovakia, where is a very famous place called Karlovy Vary. I don't know if you've heard of it, but right since ancient times, Louis XIV of France and all that, I'm talking of the 12th century, people used to come from all over Europe and England to have their baths in Karlovy Vary, which comprises about 7 different, it's a sort of a stream which goes through 7 different levels. Each of them has a lot of sulfur content. You see, so you bathe depending on your medical outlook. You not only drink the water in sips, according to what the doctor tells you, or you can get a dip inside there to cure problems like arthritis and asthma and things like that. So the capital is Prague, and the distance from Prague to Karlovy Vary would be about 2.5 to 3 hours driving. On the way, I wanted to see some of the Czechoslovak military divisions, because what they do is they take about 80% of their military divisions and mothball them. Their tanks and their vehicles are put into a cocoon sort of thing. I was interested to see that. The idea here is you put a tank into a cocoon, remove all the air, so that its maintenance and its effectiveness is ensured. You've greased it, prepared it for battle, and put it in a cocoon. It takes minutes to remove it from its cocoon, but meanwhile it lies in its cocoon. It's sort of a bulb of plastic or whatever, where the air is removed. And so with the result, metal parts don't rust and the maintenance aspects remain as they should. And if there's a war, you take it out of the cocoon, it's ready for battlefield. We haven't learned that in India. We've got large forces. Secondly, for training in the military, they have a small number. I mean, if there's a tank regiment, let us say about 40 tanks or so, they keep about 10 tanks aside, which can be used for training and replaced as they get worn out. So I wanted to see that, and I did see that. And now, on one afternoon before we went to Karlovy Vary, I had a free afternoon. Srupi had her own program. The ladies got together and she shown the sights of the place and gone to plays and to musical outlets, etc. Also to meet the wives of troops and so on to see what sort of welfare measures are being done. That particular afternoon, I was free, so she asked me that, look, I am going to the center of Prague to see the old city. It's full of cobblestones and a lovely bridge and a lovely church in the distance, a very beautiful sight in Europe. She said, if you're doing nothing, why don't you come with me? I said, all right, come with me. So I went with her. Now, since I went with her, I had a two-star general of the Air Force as my liaison officer. She had her liaison ladies and others with her. And I had my interpreter. Now, I must talk about this interpreter just to convey to you how important an interpreter is. So before coming to Europe, that is to Prague in Czechoslovakia, the capital, I had requested the foreign ministry to give me a very good interpreter. And I must compliment them. They gave me a man who was absolutely top. He was of Romanian extraction, I think. He had been born and bred in Austria and Czechoslovakia and Romania. He had done his schooling and his education there. Then he had gone to Moscow University for certain parts of his education, and he had learned Russian. Then he came to India, if you please, to Bombay University to do a master's degree in something or the other. He was there for 3 or 4 years. So he learned English and he learned Hindi. Secondly, he was a man who was himself a very happy man. I mean, he was sparkling with joy all the time. So it's a pleasant thing to have an interpreter who's always laughing and joking. But in his interpreting, he was so good that if we were discussing something across the table with the army chief or somebody in Czechoslovakia, he would interpret your English to the local Czech language, sentence by sentence, word by word, even conveying jokes in such a way that you forgot that there was an interpreter. You were talking to the man, and the interpretation was so fast and accurate, both what you said and what the other gentleman said, that you never realized that there was an interpreter there. It was like a normal conversation like you and I are having. You see? This is the beauty of an interpreter. Firstly, he's a happy man, personally well adjusted, top of his career, master of languages, and he doesn't have to think a second to give exact interpretation of whatever you are saying in whichever way, and translate it to the other guy. So he was with me, and as we were walking the square, I saw on one side a series of little shops, little trinkets and things for tourism and all that you buy stuff. And I found that there was a Czech gentleman running the shop. And he was giving us a look, a rather dirty look, if I might say, with a scowl on his face at all of us in the square. So I told my interpreter, I'd let the ladies and the others remain here because they were describing some scene, in the middle of the Prague square. I said, let's walk across and see the shop. So he and I walked across to the shop. We entered the shop. And I asked him a question which the interpreter interpreted. Why you got such an angry face? I asked. So he told me in Czech language, which is interpreted, to say, who the bloody hell are you? So I said, I am the, now the interpreter can't answer any question. Now I have to answer. So he interpreted. I said, I am the army chief from India. So his face relaxed. He says, I like India and welcome to our country, army chief from India. I said, thank you. Why have you got an angry face? I said. He said, if you're a good man from India whom we like, why are you walking in the square with those nasty Russians? So I said, I beg your pardon, they're not Russians. They are your Czech army. He said, what do you mean they're Czech army? I said, that gentleman that you point there is a Major General of Czech Air Force. And the few liaison officers, some majors and colonels of the Czech army. They are your chaps. He said, but then why are they dressed like Russians? So I said, the uniform is similar to that of the Russians. But the Russians have got a darker hue of gray, and the Czech army has a lighter hue of gray. So he said, well, I'm a civilian. How the hell am I supposed to differentiate between colors of one uniform and another when they look exactly the same? They're not really dressed the same, they act the same, and they behave the same. So I said, are you angry with the Russians? He said, I said, why? He said, because they've occupied our country. And I must tell you, at that time, I'm talking of 1989, approximately April or May, Russians had taken over Czechoslovakia, and there were two divisions of Russians, including an armored division, outside Prague. Therefore, they were in control of the land. And all the Czech people knew that. And the Czech government at that time was in cahoots with the Russians because they were in power. And their military strength was enhanced by the Russian presence. So they were running the government in, well, I won't say it was a communist country. I will say rather that it was like a dictatorship. You see? So I wouldn't say it was a democracy. It wasn't totally communist, but they were still obeying the Russians. That was the scene. So I asked this chap a few questions and I got a few answers. He said, we are very angry and we have to sort this out. I said, then what are you doing about it? He said, I'm not going to tell you about that, but we are certainly working on it. I came back that evening and there was a big dinner, official dinner by the army chief. And so he was sitting opposite and his wife was sitting next to me. And Shruti was sitting next to him opposite the table. But while we were having a drink before going for the dining table, I told him, I said, look, Miroslav, I've got something to talk to you about you and your military and your relations with the local people. See? So he requested his wife to change places. So she went and sat next to Shruti on the opposite side of the table, and he even sat next to me. And we started talking, but you can't talk too loudly at dinner. There's so many people present. You're talking in soft, more or less whispers, if you like. I said, there's some trouble brewing in your Prague, and we have to discuss. So after dinner, he told me that next day you're going to Karlovy Vary, which is a 4.5 hours drive. And I was sending your liaison officer with you, but I have decided to come with you myself. We'll discuss this issue. So he came in the car where I was sitting. And his wife went in the car where Shruti was sitting. And so we had a convoy of 4 or 5 cars. And we went on this journey. Now, during this journey of 4 or 5 hours, we discussed this threadbare. I said, when I went to a little shop on the square at Prague, I came to the conclusion that the civilian people running these shops are very angry with your army. They can't distinguish between your army and the Soviets, the Soviet Union, and the Russians. And they don't like the Russians, therefore they don't like you either, because you are in cahoots with the Russians. So Miroslav tells me, he says, what am I supposed to do? I'm only a soldier. That's the politics of the country and the government. I said, but what I think is going to happen is, I think there's going to be a revolution. Because here's an angry person. And when I asked him, what are you doing about it? He said, yes, we are working on it. Working on it means that there is some brewing planning going on, which is going to affect the governance of Czechoslovakia. So we discussed this at length. He asked me, what do I think he should do? I said, see, you're the army chief. First thing you're required to do is put on civilian clothes. He said, we never do that. Even when we go to town, we wear our uniform, so that everybody knows that we are powerful and they mustn't attack us. I said, no, that's not the way of doing it. You dress in civilian clothes, like a common Czechoslovak person, and you visit the shops and talk to them. Find out what's eating them up. I said, in the Indian Army, we believe that unless the public loves the army can't function. It's not the government which makes us function. It's the Constitution and the people of India who make us function. Because our loyalty to the Constitution. See? And the Constitution has been given to the people of India. They are the ones who select the government. And therefore, the army is theirs to love and to use. And I do believe, I gave the example of Argentina, where the local people hated the army, and there was revolution after revolution in Argentina. See? You remember Peron and all that in the dictatorship there in Argentina. And the military used to bomb the civilian squares when they were wanting to rise up against the military. So I said the military cannot function unless the civilians love them. And since the civilians hate you, it's time you created some love and goodwill over there by personal effort and asked some of your senior officers to also move around and meet them. So he did that. I left Czechoslovakia, Nebedeta, after 3-4 days. We flew in a plane to Bratislava, which is on the eastern side, which is now a separate, that's the Slav Republic. So they were the Slavs. And when I landed in Bratislava, they were going to see me off. I was crossing a bridge over the Danube River. And the other side of the bridge was Austria. And my military attaché from Austria had got some cars for me there to bring me to Venice, and thereafter to visit certain areas of what was then West Germany, because there was East Germany and West Germany. So I noticed there also that all the Bratislav officers and ladies who met us were very warm, very loving, but they didn't think much of those people in Prague, which is their capital, because of the ethnic difference and the fact that they did feel they were not being treated equally by the government in Prague. Anyway, we came away. Now, this must have been about May or June. You recollect, in 1989, I think toward the latter half of the year, there was a revolution in Czechoslovakia. There was a person called Václav Havel. If you study your history, he was a poet and an author of some sort, but he led a revolution where the whole public rose up against the government and the military. And throughout, the government insisted that the Soviet armies leave Czechoslovakia. Of course, they were assisted by the Western part. And then Václav Havel became the president of Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia eventually broke, as you know, but a little afterwards. And in December, I got a Christmas card from Miroslav Vacek, the chief that I had been talking to. A very nice Christmas card to say, thank you, good talking to you. I am now the Minister of Defense of the new republic. So it goes to show how that revolution took place, and the fact that Miroslav Vacek, who was the army chief, became the defense minister of the new government, of Václav Havel's government. What is the lesson here? Lesson here that all militaries anywhere in the world must be one-to-one with their public. Otherwise, things can go wrong. And they must be able to move around openly with the civilians and not try and use their uniform or their power to sort of control. That was a visit to Czechoslovakia. I now had an interesting visit in India. The Indian defense minister was K.C. Pant in those days of the Congress Party. And he had invited the defense minister of the Soviet Union to visit India with a delegation. Because India was wanting to buy certain equipment, tanks and anti-aircraft guns and uh, self-propelled guns and things like that from the Soviet Union. And there were some deals going on. So he wanted to invite the Soviet defense minister. Now, the Soviet defense minister was a four-star general by the name of Yazov. I'm talking of 1989. It's a very interesting year because that is the year when Gorbachev literally sold his country down the line to the Western world, if you recollect. And the Soviet Union collapsed a year or two later. So Yazov came with a team of 3 or 4 three-star generals with him, who were mostly technical men, to decide on what type of equipment, etc., to be sent to India. The trouble with India was that they didn't have enough money to buy this. Though the equipment is very cheap from Russia, about 1/4 the price in similar equipment from the West. Nevertheless, it was a lot of money, and India was not doing very well in those days as far as finances are concerned. So our budgets were limited, and so we were wanting to buy tanks only or certain types of self-propelled guns for anti-aircraft. The Soviets were saying that there's no point in buying these tanks. It's very expensive to do that because when the tanks require maintenance and overhaul, you must have the equipment to do the overhaul yourself. See? So they were trying to sell that equipment to us. We didn't have the money to buy it. So that little problem was there. Anyway, as part of ceremonial visits of this nature, there was first a conference in the Ministry of Defense by the Defense Minister, where all the 3 defense chiefs of India were also invited, and there was a little discussion to say what does everybody want and how do we deal with it. Then General Yazov was to call separately to each of the Indian military chiefs. So he had called on the Navy chief, who was the chairman Chiefs of Staff Committee, and he was to call on the Air Force chief, but before that he was wanted to call on me, since I was the youngest. I decided for whatever reason, I mean, sometimes you just get ideas without knowing why that idea came. I decided to impress him. Because when I saw him in the discussion with the defense minister, I found him to be a very clever man. He had a lot of wisdom in him. So I thought I should try and make friends with this man. So I decided that when he comes to visit me a few days down the line, I would give him, he was giving a present to each chief, maybe a pistol or something like that. Mostly Czechoslovak made, because Czechoslovakia makes very good pistols. And they're cheap. So I thought that let's present him with a weapon. Now, India had made the design of the 7.62 self-loading rifle, SLR, which has been with us for the last 30, 40 years, and we're changing it now because it's got old and it's not very good. It's a bit too heavy. And this was designed by Armament Design Unit in Pune. I had visited Pune and I told them this defense minister of Soviet Union is visiting. So let us impress him by presenting him one of these weapons you've just made. All right. So I said, what I want is that you make a special, same design, but each item is looked at carefully. In production of a weapon, what happened is that the standard of each item tends to fall over a period of time because people don't use the correct alloys or the correct type of metal or something to save money or to make money if you like. So I said, you'll make the topmost parts, then the black barrel and the magazines, which are black in color, will be silver plated. Right? So that it's a shining weapon. Secondly, from 300 yards, every shot that you fire must go through the center of the bull of the target. So you test a special weapon and make. Then I said, that you'll give 2 magazines with that. The magazines, they carry about 18 to 20 rounds each. So the magazine will be silver plated. And each round will be gold plated. The ammunition that we give you. It's brass ammunition, so it's yellow, dirty yellow in color, but if you gold plate it, it becomes shiny. So it's a presentation there. And I said, we put in a velvet case with a glass top. And when you open the case, 2 little purple lights will come on, purple velvet, and the box in which this weapon resides. They made that. And I looked at it, it was very good. So that was one present for him. The second present for him, we've got a large organization in Kanpur which produces clothing. You know, old clothing factories of Kanpur, run earlier by the British India Corporation. There's a lot of mills and things like that, cloth mills and mills of clothes, etc. We had ordered them to make some parka coats. You know what a parka coat is? When you go to high altitude, you want a coat which is able to keep the rainy water away or snow away from you on the top, but must be warm enough to help you survive in temperatures which are 20 Celsius or 30 Celsius below zero. You see? Now, these coats are available in the Alps for those who go skiing in Alps. But when you go to the Alps, they are very high quality, but they're only meant for about 15,000 to 16,000 feet high, because that's what the height is there. When you go to Siachen Glacier, which is 18,000 feet, and you go to certain areas in Siachen, which are 21,000 feet, 19,000 feet, these are not good enough. So we had to produce layers of more stuff inside this parka coat to make it warm enough for soldiers to survive in the climate of the Siachen Glacier or Tibet in the winter. Then the second point is the Indian production is very heavy. I did not make a special coat which is absolutely light as a thumb. You should be able to lift it with one finger, and yet it has all the heat and the quality. So they made that, and one of those I decided to present to the Soviet general. Now, when he came to my office, he presented me with a pistol with a lot of flourish. I thanked him, and I looked round, and I presented him with his gun, and I presented him with the parka. Now, Matthew, I was trying to do things far above my capability. Idea here being that if you like my gun, give us the order, and India will produce it. But in India, you could not produce massive quantities of these weapons because the government didn't have the factories and didn't have the money to put in, nor the will to. I described to you once earlier that the earlier governments of India were always preferring to buy stuff abroad because you get 15% under the table for your pocket. Corruption. So therefore you import from outside. It is this particular government which has now decided make in India, which is essential. And if you take China, for instance, producing so many weapons of their own, even though they copied the Soviet Union weapons, but now they are doing it on their own and they're producing their own stuff. They're producing their own fighter aircraft, their own ships, their own things. Why can't India do it? After all, we've been independent for 73 years and we got our independence 2 years before the Chinese. But the Chinese started to do things on their own